So we're here to talk about paying for grad school. And grad school funding is a little different than undergrad. We want to start by asking those of you who have been funded to do research to stand up. This is a trick question, by the way. Thank you. Okay, you can sit down. So I think you get my point. So all of you have been funded to do research. And the interesting thing about funding for grad school is that money begets money. And the more money you have gotten, the more money you're likely to get. So one of the reasons that we love to come and talk to you is that all of you are starting ahead of the game. I'm Shelley Hawthorne, and I run the Office of Fellowships and the Graduate Writing Lab. I run the Office of Fellowships for so many years. So I do have kind of a long history with graduate funding. And the Graduate Writing Lab is a little newer and really sort of combines with the work of the Office of Fellowships.
And hi, I'm Sedona Heidinger. I'm a PhD in history and a GA in the Office of Fellowships.
Do we know what we're talking about, Sedona? To some degree. One of the things that we want to start off with is that we know a lot about funding in 2023 and 24. All of us are well aware that everything is changing, and that's nothing new, but funding is changing a lot. And so we're going to tell you about funding for 2022, 23, as well as 15 years prior to that, the knowledge that we've accumulated. However, keep your eyes and ears open because everything is changing. And one of the things that I have learned in this position is people who sort of jump at things first, funding first, tend to get it. So if there is an announcement that is advertised as new, people probably won't encourage you too much to apply for it because nobody else has applied for it. But you should pay attention to it. So we have this little person here kind of questioning us throughout the session because we are still learning. And we hope that you kind of get the message that we are specialists in the past, but you need to be the specialist going forward.
So what we'll be doing today is talking about several methods and ways that you know about funding doctoral education, regardless of discipline, and 3 tips to ensure success in funding. And so we'll give you an overview of different kinds of funding, internal opportunities within either this university or the one you're applying to, and then external opportunities from nationwide or even international funding agencies. And then give you some tips for success. And do you want to be taking notes?
Well, if you have some, even a phone to make, we will be asking you some questions. So yeah, if you can have something to make notes with, that would be great. I know some of you are thinking about maybe law school, med school, PA. We're kind of focusing more on master's and PhD programs. So I would say the funding for med school and other professional careers is a little different, but everything that we tell you will still be useful. Okay, we are going to take, 30 seconds. So if you're able, please stand up and find one person to talk to, and then share your answers to the following questions. What do you know? How do people pay for grad school? So stand up again. This is what I haven't stand up before, so you can practice.
there are, of course, loans, federal or private, those, yeah, loans are there. Other things you can use, if you have savings, if you have a job, those are ways that you can support yourself during your education. If you're working for a university or have an employer that can pay for a degree related to what you do, then there are benefits to help you with that, so definitely look into that. There are also scholarships for tuition, sometimes for fees, room and board. Sometimes they're merit-based, sometimes they're identity-based. So look into those. And then also there are teaching or research assistantships that you can do to kind of build your professional knowledge while you're taking classes. So those are TAs, RAs, GAs, like my position. Those can all help you fund your education. And then there are also fellowships internally. Here at the U of A, we have university fellows as one example, as a prestigious opportunity, and then also external fellowships. So there's dissertation fellowships, there's fellowships from communities that are Raytheon, other kind of labs that fund specific discipline. So a lot of kind of ways that you can put together your funding.
Great, we're going to go into detail on the last two. I just got a few notes. Loans can be a great option for grad school. There are loan calculators where you can say, hey, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up after the degree. How much does it make sense to borrow? And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to take out loans, I think that's a really helpful tool. And then I also want to point out that being an employee of a university is different than the teaching and research assistantship. And I didn't know this for a long time. But if you know 100% that you want to go to Duke University or whatever, it's not a bad idea to be looking for employee positions there and just getting kind of your foot in. The teaching and research assistantships are often offered after you're admitted to a program. It's just a few little details. Okay, so yeah, file the FAFSA, use the salary calculators.
And so then for internal university funding, there are kind of several ways you can look for it. Look for it and find it. We want to go through it. Oh. And so then with your on your phone, with your notes, take a second to write down one or more answers to these questions. So what are some questions that you should ask with respect to the program about funding when you're deciding where you want to go, kind of narrowing down? What do you want to know from your program about what they offer you? And then what is a graduate assistantship? So take a minute.
And again, these questions are relevant like for med school and for law school and other things. So hopefully that gave you a little time to get some ideas down. I don't expect that you're going to remember any of the details we tell you next. But this is what I hope you do remember. I hope you remember to ask a lot of questions about funding. A lot of incoming students are like afraid to bring up the topic. But it's really important that you have that conversation with the faculty that you plan to work with the graduate the director of graduate studies in a program, and there's usually someone who's like a staff member who's not faculty, who is helping the grad students. And those people tend to have an awful lot of power, even though it doesn't seem like it. And to be usually a source of lots of knowledge, because if it's a good program, they've probably been around for a while and they've seen different people approach the program in different ways. So ask those people. Even though they're not faculty, they're often like really good sources of information and super knowledgeable. So as we said, okay, so here's some ideas, but basically just learn what's typical, what funding resources they have. So you want to ask about okay, what do students usually get when they come into the program? You want to look at the faculty. Do some faculty have some really big research grants? If so, they have money for GA positions or for research assistant positions. It's helpful to know, okay, in this program, how many undergrads are there? If there's a ton of undergrads, they need teaching assistants. And that will be a good source of support for you as a grad student. And then ask around and try to find out from either faculty or people who are further along in the program, what is the average debt for students? For some programs, it's zero. For some programs, it's $150,000, which is fine if you're going to be a chemical engineer, but not fine if you're a historian. Yeah, and then also reach out to faculty and ask them, especially ones who you really want to work with, because chances are they really want to work with you, so talk to them about it. I think that's the other thing.
Something else about getting in touch with the coordinator, the non-faculty kind of liaison, is they can also usually put you in touch with current graduate students before you make a decision. I've been that person in my department. I've got some to come and some to not come based on what I say, but sometimes the offer that they tell you can look very different in terms of how much things are taxed, how much your stipend goes back to tuition if you don't get tuition fully covered. And so current graduate students can give you really good advice on what it actually looks like day to day to be in that program and how that compensation lets you live on that wage or you have to get another job. So that's something that's very good way. And so for graduate assistantships, the kind of different buckets they fall into for different programs, you can be a teaching assistant, and so that means you can normally lead the sections or labs of a larger class or one faculty mentor, and then you'll be kind of leading reviews or practical sessions and getting teaching experience. You'll be doing grading, and if you want to be in academia or learn how to be a teacher, be an educator, these are really valuable GA shifts to get. If you want to be on the research side, you can also work as an RA in a lab, for example, working on maybe one of those large grants, being part of that team for a specific grant for a project or research mission on a specific unit in your program. And then you can also be an outreach GA. And so working for administrative offices, offices that provide services to students, and things like what I do in the graduate center, working with supporting students who are looking for funding. So there are a lot of ways that you can further your development as a scholar and then also gain very important skills that will help you later on.
So usually graduate assistantships are offered within the department that you're enrolled in, but there are a number throughout the university, like in the grad center, in residence life, in the office of the provost. So other units on campus also have graduate assistant positions. So yeah, just kind of, there are some funding opportunities that are just for incoming students. We have some examples there, but know that in as much as you have a program oh, I really want to go to that one, programs have students that they're we really want her to come. And so they reserve funding to entice those students to come to those programs. So just know that that funding exists that's only for incoming students.
And so ways that you can find these internal funding opportunities is to talk with like the print department, the department that you're interested in. Use the website, but also the department coordinator is a great resource for that. Speak with faculty and other students. They can tell you what opportunities they've gotten, because they might not be on the website, they might be from another but adjacent unit that would be helpful. And definitely use the graduate college website, either our grad college or the one that they're applying to, and scholarship universe, finding scholarships, but also like research opportunities, fellowships, things like that. And then for travel awards, you can look at the Honors College, Honors and National Competitive Scholarships as well.
Which Valeria will cover.
Yes.
Okay, so that is internal funding that's internal to university. We're going to talk some about funding that comes from outside the university to fund students. Here's some sources. So the government does fund students. There's international sources. I don't think I knew what a foundation was, really, when I was an undergrad. But there are nonprofit entities that their goal is to make some change in the world. And there are, for example, foundations like for women in science, or foundations for, what else? So many. Yeah, exactly. So many different foundations. And foundation funding tends to be fairly flexible and interesting. There's professional organizations. One of the things I love about having students search for funding is there's so many like little professional organizations that are very niche, and it's really important as a grad student to find your professional organization. We were over in chemistry and like we were searching together, and there's this one student who was like, oh my, there's a organization for my molecule. So it's amazing what you can find. Actually, other universities as well, and then there's also commercial and industry support. So this is where external awards come from.
Okay, so we'll do another 20-second talk. So please stand up again for April. Find a new person to talk to, maybe someone in the row behind you or across the aisle, and share one or more answers to these questions we have here. So why would a nonprofit, a foundation, or a governmental agency give money to graduate students? What's their motivation? And then what are some activities that these nonprofits, agencies might want graduate students to do to fulfill that mission? So let them share some ideas.
They're funded to finish grad school. If you are female, there tends to be a really nice pile of awards for people finishing their dissertation for a woman. And then there's some, in general, the grad programs they do not want people to be ABD, all but dissertate. They want people to finish their program. So they have funding let's get you out of here. Travel, and Valeria will talk about that. Then there's all these internships, externships, practicums, amazing opportunities in all different fields that you can get funding to do. Also, there's funding to be yourself. So this is I was talking about foundations. So for example, there's the Korean American Awards, there's LGBTQ+, or Women in Science, Or I think there's even one for like Christians in science. So like a really interesting array of awards. These usually are not gonna like fund you for a whole year, but they might be a few $1,000s or even a few hundred and let you buy a laptop. And then there's also funding to do a particular type of research or to add a perspective to research. So let's say you are in a lab, there is a foundation that is like tries to find alternatives to using animals for testing drugs. And you're like, oh, I have an idea for that, and you can apply to that foundation. Here's a few examples. Oh, yeah. You might have heard some of these. So for example, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. If you think you might go to grad school, not next year, but the following year, just apply to that. You know that there will be some of those. The rest of these, we'll see. And I think there'll be some new ones too.
And so ways that you can find these fellowships is we encourage you to use your network, your community, your classmates, colleagues here, and when you get to your program, and really take charge of research. That list from the beginning of your graduate school to the end, I really want you to kind of try and hit as many of those buckets as possible, like get a fellowship for incoming students. Okay, next I want to go to this conference to further my research and select that one, and then I'll get a research grant, and then I'll finish provide a distribution grant. So really kind of building a whole like, list of both small and then it consists of accomplishments.
Again, we're kind of going back to what I was saying before. Talk to people. Ask people, how did you fund this? How did you get funding when you were starting this research? When you're at conferences, if you go to a conference, go to a session that interests you and ask that question.
And so there are resources that you can use to find and kind of build your research. And so on the Grad Center website, we have there are several databases that we subscribe to, that you have access to. And so there's one GRAPES that's only for grad students and postdocs. And there's also really big sophisticated databases, Pivot and Grant Forward. And there are ways that you can, we advise you to do this. Set up an alert to get notified on when a grant becomes available. It changes its eligibility date for you. So putting in that front work to get your alert set up will benefit you moving forward. And then making sure you sign up for listservs of agencies, USA Jobs, and then departmental or field listservs. They have a lot of opportunities, especially funding for conferences and travel. And then there's definitely Google and Advisor and programs are really good resources.
Someone I know is like, I found my postdoc on Instagram. You never know. You have to just kind of keep your. And I would say, like, these databases are very enticing and they're amazing. They're wonderful. That really, most people find opportunities like that through this. Oh, I don't think we have time to do this. Take 5 minutes sometime today and try this.
And so the tips that we promised you for success in your funding research. Make sure that when you have a deadline, say August 1st for an application, make sure your deadline is a few days before that, just to allow yourself a little bit of a grace period in case something happens, and make sure that by that early deadline you have a complete draft, ideally a month before your due date, so that you can get feedback from your advisor, from peers, from a supervisor, and then be able to have them return to you and then have a newsletter draft a week before your deadline. So you have a really polished and persuasive draft to submit. And then figuring out, this is also a kind of getting to know yourself and how you work through applying for funding, as you get to know how, like, whether you are externally motivated, like if you need somebody to check in with you, somebody to email, hey, did you do this yet? Or if you have more that internally
apply for a fellowship this fall. And I told my boss, I will have a draft for you a month ahead of time. And I like, driven by shame. So like, I'm not a tutor. So it's good to figure out, some people like, oh, their boss is not like, whatever. So it's really important. Like, this really is the key to success, because these letters of recommendation are hugely important. And so in order for somebody to write a good letter, you have to have a good draft, a good idea of what you're going to do, like well ahead of time, so that they have time to write good letters. And I think Valeria is going to talk about this, but it's really about being organized, giving them everything they need. It is so much work to write a letter of recommendation. And so ask them, what do you need to write a good letter? And give them that draft ahead of time. Tell them, one of the big reasons that fellowship applications are not submitted is because people don't get their letters of recommendation in, and it's terrible to have done all of that work and then someone else thinks your application. So tell them, I'm planning to submit on this day. Can you please also submit, just to get it off my mind? So they'll see the official deadline, but if they know that you have everything in and they're just waiting for you, they'll be much more likely to submit early. Say thank you. Like, I write a number of letters of recommendation, and if somebody brings me a cookie and a card, like, I'm really very grateful. So, go out of your way to show appreciation for what you did.
And so three steps you can take right now to get started on this journey is to make a funding friend, some of the people we talked to today. We encourage you to make a spreadsheet of dropping in things that you find on Pivot, on groups, opportunities that appeal to you, things that can organize and streamline your application process for particular opportunities. And then definitely update your CV, and there are career centers, writing centers, an advisor here to make sure that that your CV is really advantageous and reflective of the work you've done, and showing you that you're a good fit for the opportunity.
What if I only have time to do one thing?
Make a funding friend, right?
Yes.
This is okay.
I would agree with you. Yeah, it's amazing. Sedona's heard me tell this story, but there's this organization called PEO that funds women finishing their dissertations, and there's a chapter that got 3 of these. They're like funding for a whole year. They're great. And so they were happy. They invited me and these other women out, and I was like introducing the awardees to one another, and they're like, Shelley, we're roommates. And they had all worked together on this application. And this happens a really amazing number of times, that even though it seems like these are competitive and you're working against each other, it's the people who are holding each other accountable and helping each other through this that tend to be successful. Thank you. Good luck.
And now we have Valeria Quijada from the Honors College to talk about nationally competitive scholarships.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. So, as was mentioned, my name is Valeria Quijada, and I'm here to talk about the Office of Nationally Competitive Scholarships. And so maybe some of you have heard of it, maybe not, but I'm here to talk about the different opportunities we work with and how, whether you get the scholarship or not, there's also a lot of value in the process. And so I'll also be sharing a couple examples as to what I mean by that. So just a little background about our office. Our office is meant to assist undergraduate students, graduate students as well, and alumni in competing for many different types of scholarships. So we provide advising, we provide feedback, and we also sometimes are considered a middleman of the process because some scholarships require you to apply through us, so you cannot apply by yourself. And so we're here for that. And so before I continue with a list of opportunities opportunities, and kind of briefly go through them. Can I get a raise of hands who is currently in their first year of undergrad? Is there anyone? 1, 2. And when I say first year, second year, third year, or fourth year, what I'm really referring to is when you're going to graduate, right? So if you would be a first year student, well, I guess technically you would be second, but depending based on when you're going to graduate. So do I have any sophomores in the room with me? So that means that you still have 2 more years to go. Okay, lots of sophomores, great. And what about juniors? Okay, so a decent amount. Okay. And seniors? Like rising seniors, as in this fall, as the beginning of your last year? Couple? Okay, great. And then, can I get a raise of hands for those of you who are in STEM? Doesn't matter the kind of STEM. Okay, so all of you are in STEM. Great. Well, okay. And does anyone here have a double major in maybe non-STEM? Okay, a couple. Do we have double majors in more STEM? Okay, great. Good variety. Okay, so I will talk about a couple of those scholarships that might be a good fit. I know this program, the summer program, helps you all kind of learn a little bit more about research. Is anyone right now in lab doing research? Great. Well, I have opportunities for you guys. So let's talk about it. So I have 2 big scholarships that I work with, which are for sophomores and juniors that are in STEM, currently doing research. They're called the Goldwater and the Astronaut. Now, both of them provide undergraduate funding. And they're both looking for the future researchers of the U.S. And so what that means is to be competitive for either of these applications, you would need to be currently doing research and have been doing research for a decent amount of time prior to your application. As a top 1 research university, these scholarships are highly competitive because there's a lot of students doing research, right? But they also come with a lot of great benefits. So on top of the undergraduate funding they also provide networking and mentoring opportunities. This is especially true for the astronaut scholarship, where they invest a lot of money in that mentoring and networking aspect. So for example, our astronaut scholar about 2 or 3 years ago, he got to be part of Mark Kelly's induction ceremony, and he even got to say a few words. So that's the kind of connections that the Astronaut Foundation provides. Astronaut only allows partner institutions, which we are one, to nominate 2 students. So we have to pick 2 students from our highly competitive students here on campus to send them off to astronaut, and then typically what happens is that they'll pick at least one of them. And I say typically because ever since 2011, we've had an astronaut scholar every single year, because that's how competitive our students are. Now, for the Goldwater, we're able to nominate 4 students, and we have had it where all 4 students we nominate get the Goldwater. That is a very, very, very good year. Sometimes it's just one, sometimes none of our students are picked, and it's not because any of our students are not competitive, right? If we're nominating you for any scholarship, it's because we genuinely believe that you have what it takes to win the scholarship. We don't just nominate for the sake of nominating or to fill a certain quota. However, you are competing at the national level with many other institutions. And so sometimes those students may just be a little bit more competitive, or maybe, the scholarship is looking for a specific type of STEM, right? Maybe they're trying to invest in a different branch, and it just happens that our students are not part of those branches, so they pick someone else, right? And that is okay. But the purpose of these scholarships, on top of the possibility of winning of them, is also to get you ready to talk about yourself in a way that advocates for you, right? Especially for students in STEM, but I think it's true for all students across campus. You don't have a lot of practice in talking about yourself in academic writing because nobody's asking you to, right? Maybe some random gen ed that you took your first year, they might ask you to do a "Who are you?" essay, maybe. But it's not the norm, right? And so I like to think about that as a muscle, right? One that you have to use to make it stronger. It's not easy to be able to talk about yourself in an essay or 2 that really sums up who you are, what you're about, and why that is important. And also why this organization should fund you over someone else, right? But yet it is possible to do it, and if you practice, if you do it often, It also facilitates writing grad school applications. It also facilitates, applying for jobs, right? Because then you become very comfortable writing about yourself, and you know exactly who you are, what you want, and where you're trying to go from there. And I know maybe some of these things you're like, oh, that's easy. I can sit down and write a personal statement right now. But it's a lot harder than you think. I have students from all grade levels who struggle with it, grad students as well, because they don't know what to say. They haven't had to do it in a long time or maybe ever. And so it does take practice, and we're here to help you with that. So getting back into a little bit of a summary of some of these other scholarships we work with, the UDAL scholarship is open to students who are interested. There's 3 categories. One of them is environmental, so that's open to all students. And so if you have been doing work in environmental sciences, or even if that's not your major, but maybe you work in the community in the environment sector, maybe that's what you've been volunteering in for the last few years, you could still apply to UDAL, right? What they're trying to find is someone who's invested in making the world a better place through efforts in the environment and conservation, things like that. Now, UDAL has 2 other categories, and those are specifically for our Native American students, and so that is tribal public policy and Native American healthcare. So those would be for Native American students who are part of those majors and who are looking to do that post-undergrad. Then we have the Truman Scholarship. Now, this scholarship, we don't get a lot of STEM applications because we think many times students think Truman, which is a public service scholarship, means it's for non-STEM, it's for humanities, it's for the poli-sci majors. That's not true. They're actually looking for applications from any academic background, and they love STEM because they don't get a lot of this. And so Truman is for juniors. Up until now, in case I didn't mention it, Fulbright, Astronaut, and UDAL will accept applications for sophomores and juniors. Truman is only for juniors, so that means that you have 1 more year, right, before you graduate. So public service is a pretty wide definition, at least the way the Truman Foundation sees it. And what they want to do is that you are going to do, after you go to grad school, you're going to do something that is of public good. That you are going to give back in some way that is relevant to the academic journey that you've had until now. Therefore, they are willing to fund you $40,000 for grad school. They are willing to fund MD, JD, master's programs. The only program they're not willing to fund is an MBA. So I would love to see some of you consider the Truman, because the thing is, with STEM, many of the research that is being done in STEM can be of public service, can be of public good. You just have to make that argument. We also have another public service scholarship, which is the Voyager Scholarship. So this one's from the Obama Foundation, who came together with the CEO of Airbnb. And so Voyager is for sophomores, and this would be for spring semester of your sophomore year. And Voyager will give you undergraduate funding, plus they will give you $10,000 to do a sort of like trip of a lifetime. You can call it that, where Airbnb will give you money to find lodging, and the rest they will give you to travel and kind of get an immersive experience. And so with Voyager, that one's probably the most accessible scholarship because it was built that way. And it doesn't require letters of rec. It really just requires a couple of essays where you're making strong arguments that what you're trying to do is of public service. You would also be connected to the Obama Foundation network, which is pretty wide, and so networking and mentoring opportunities would probably also be easy to access through the Voyager. Now, the Gilman Scholarship, as Shelley mentioned, I will be talking about some study abroad. I know for STEM it's a little harder sometimes depending on your specific STEM major to study abroad, but it's not impossible. So the Gilman is a federally funded scholarship for those who have Pell Grants. And so you would know if you're Pell Grant eligible based on your FAFSA. I personally am a Gilman Scholar, so I got to study abroad in Brazil for 6 weeks, and I got to learn Portuguese and the culture, and just great opportunity that I wouldn't have had without the Gilman, because I definitely wouldn't have been able to pay for study abroad without Gilman. And so Gilman will give you up to $5,000 to study abroad, and it consists of a couple essays. Now, if you go to a country that has a critical language, as in a language that is less commonly taught, and you do an additional essay, you can get an additional $3,000. So you could get up to $8,000 to study abroad. Now, with Gilman, you can use it for a summer study abroad opportunity. So for those of you who are like, well, I can't go a semester abroad, my program would not allow it, I would get behind. You could do a summer, Gilman will fund it. You could even do a spring break trip, and Gilman will also fund that. So if you're Pell Grant eligible, I hope you'll consider it. It is a great opportunity, and study abroad is really life-changing. People don't just say that, it's true, I promise. And we have scholarships like the CLS and the Bourne, which are for critical languages. And so CLS will fund you a summer abroad in a country if you can make the argument as to why that country, why do you need to learn that language, how's that relevant? And they'll plan it all for you. They'll tell you, hey, this is when you need to show up, these are the dates during the summer, they'll take care of everything for you. The Bourne is a little different where you're telling the Bourne where you want to go, how long you'll be there, and how much, and they can fund you up to $20,000. So some students choose to be there for several months, but they'll accept summer programs and shorter programs, especially for STEM students, because they understand the restrictions that you all have. And the Bourne, the big difference is on top of you planning where you're going, what language, how many, language classes you're taking, all that. The Bourne also requires you to work for the federal government for a year. And so for some people who are interested in federal work, that's a good foot in the door sort of opportunity, because they'll try to set you up in a department that is relevant to your studies. So it's not like you're just randomly going to be someone in the federal government, doing a year of service. They'll try to put you in a place that makes sense career-wise. So if that's where you want your career to go, it could help open some doors. Now, these scholarships I'm going to talk about briefly are for seniors. And so what is the Fulbright, Marshall, Rhodes, Churchill, Gates, Cambridge, and the Lafayette, which is very new. Also the McCall McBain, so a lot of these on the list, they're for studying abroad, like doing grad work abroad. So Marshall, Rhodes, Churchill, Gates, Cambridge, those are all for the UK. Rhodes is specifically for Oxford, Churchill specifically for Cambridge at Churchill College, and it's a one-year STEM master's program. So you really want to see that STEM part, right? Gates, Cambridge is also for Cambridge, but they don't care what major you are. So, and the Gates Cambridge application it's really nice because it's an additional extra questions, couple of questions from the Cambridge application. So it's not as expensive as some of these other applications, and therefore a little less time consuming. And then the Marshalls for any UK institution. So I know we hear a lot about Oxford and Cambridge, and there's a lot of razzle-dazzle to these institutions because they're very old, they're very well known, and they're very prestigious. But for your specific program, maybe the best program in the UK is not at Oxford or Cambridge. That's actually very likely, because I know for Oxford, their STEM programs aren't necessarily the strongest in the UK. They're good because it's Oxford, but they're not great necessarily. So maybe your dream program is at the Royal Holloway School, or at the Imperial College. Any other UK institution, you could use the Marshall to apply to that. And in the UK, what I've learned is that there's a lot of one-year master's programs. That is actually the most common type of master's program in the UK. And so if you're like, well, I do want to do grad school, but 2 years seems like a lot, it's a big commitment, the UK might be a way to go. Not to mention you would get residency in the UK. I think right now it's up to 2 years. So you just kind of want to have that experience, not to mention go to a great school and get funding. These are opportunities you should consider. I will also say that many of these institutions, although prestigious and very fancy and all, many of them do have at least partial international student financial aid, and they also are a lot less expensive than U.S. institutions. So that just might be something you want to consider. The Fulbright is probably one of the biggest scholarships we work with, because it is in over 140 countries that you can choose from to go to. Now, every country is a little different. They offer different types of awards, and the amount of awards is also different depending on the country. But for example, you could use a Fulbright to go teach English abroad. If you wanted a break from the academics, but you still wanted to do something that looks good on your grad school application and looks good on your resume, Fulbright ETA would be a good way to go. but maybe you're like, you know what, I actually want to use the Fulbright for a one-year master's program. Several countries, including the UK, but also countries like France, Spain, Italy, they also offer one-year master's programs that are funded for Fulbright, by Fulbright, I'm sorry. So these are just some opportunities to consider. The Lafayette Fellowship is for a master's program in France, and again, it's like very, very new. Like I just learned about its existence a couple weeks ago. So, but if you're also parler le français, that is the place to go. And then we have the McCall-McBain Scholarship, which is for Canada. It's for the McGill University, and so that is their like, top research university. Fully funded, and also big investment on networking and mentoring opportunities. I know, Canada's a lot closer, so if any of you kind of want to venture out of the country, but maybe still stay close to home, or at least close enough, that would be a good opportunity. And then we have, Knight Hennessy Scholarship is for Stanford. So if you're doing programs at Stanford, they have full funding through Knight Hennessy, and they will fund all grad programs. Where that funding comes from is very dependent on your grad funding, because I believe for example, an MD, I think the Knight Hennessy will fund half those years, and then Stanford will fund the rest. But that means you also have to get into your Stanford program. That is one of the requirements for the scholarship. Knight Hennessy, big on networking, mentoring. It's a cohort-based scholarship, so you would be interacting with your cohort, and it creates a lot of really amazing opportunities. The Paul and Daisy Sotos Fellowship is for new Americans, and so that also comes with graduate funding and mentoring and networking opportunities. And then the Sambas Scholars Program, that is one of the few that is for U.S. funding, so if you want to go to any institution here in the U.S. However, that one doesn't really provide mentoring or networking. It's just $20,000 for tuition, which is still great. I mean, that's $20,000. But yeah, these are just some of the opportunities that we work with. And so I spent a lot of time on that, and I'm running kind of short, so I'll just go through how do you find these opportunities? What are the next steps? If any part of my presentation called out to you where you're like, I would like to know more. I don't know which one's a good fit for me. I don't know if any of them are a good fit for me. Reach out. We can have a conversation. Just because you reach out and connect with me does not mean I'm going to force you to apply to anything. But I would be more than happy to answer your questions. And maybe one of the opportunities that would be a great fit for you, maybe it's something super niche that's out there. Maybe I don't know about it just yet. But if you talk to me, I will look for opportunities for you. I will talk to my colleagues at other institutions and see if there's something else out there, right? Developing strong applications. So I know this can be a little scary, right? Especially when we hear the word competitive or prestigious. But it's really not that complex once you realize why are you applying? So for example, if you're applying to any of the opportunities abroad, saying, well, I think the UK is cool is not a really good reason to say I want to go to Oxford to study whatever, right? You need to give solid reason. You need to be able to back it up and be like, hey, this is what I'm currently studying, this is what I hope to do post-graduation, and this is how your program fits into that. You need to be able to be specific, to be detailed, and to connect the dots for your readers, because they're reading a lot of applications, and it's really easy for them to just be like, next, right? So you really need to grab onto your reader from the beginning, and you're not going to do that with ambiguous statements. You're going to do that by providing facts and being clear, concise, and just as detailed as humanly possible. Now, it's really important to understand the mission, the values of the funding organization. So what do I mean by that? Think about, for example, with Born. I mentioned that you have to do 1 year in the federal government. So maybe some of you are like, I would never work for the government. That's fair, that's fine. But you wouldn't apply to a scholarship that has a requirement then, right? Because then you have competing interests, and it's not really going to work out. So it's important to know, that what the mission is and the values of who's funding you, and also to make sure that it's aligned with your own mission and values, and that there's no conflict of interest. And as I mentioned, connecting the dots, you need to paint the clearest picture you can to whoever's reading your application about who you are, what you stand for, and why that matters. If you can't do that by the end of your application, if you can't answer all the potential questions they may have, and they end up coming away from your application with more questions than answers, then they're not going to be convinced to fund you because they can't get those questions answered, right? So you need to provide as much information as you can. Okay, so if you need clarifications for many of these scholarships, sometimes it's a little confusing what they want, or sometimes they update parts of the website, not the whole website, and it's just like, it can get kind of messy. It's okay to either reach out to me or to reach out to the funding organization and be like, hey, I'm trying to apply for this, but I'm not really sure what this means, right? You're not going to get points taken away from your application for asking questions. And then again, emphasis on connecting the dots. Really, this is the big one. You need to be able to connect the dots for your reader, right? In a way, you can think about it as if let's say you're a company owner and you're going to the bank to ask for more money, or you're going to go to a board of investors and be like, hey, you should invest in my company, right? You're going to show up with all the data, right? You're going to show up with graphs, you're going to show up with proof, you're going to, it's everything. You're going to provide everything because they're not going to give you money if you can't provide it, right? And so an application for scholarships like this, it's very similar. You got to provide all the facts. You got to be able to back it up. You got to be able to be specific, and you've got to understand what is it the scholarship wants from you. So, for example, like scholarships like Fulbright, they want to know not just like, okay, why do you want to go abroad and how does this serve a purpose, but also how are you going to help with the mission of Fulbright, which is mutual understanding? How are you going to engage with your local community? What does that look like, right? Scholarships like Marshall, they have a big focus on ambassadorial potential. Why? Because they understand that when you go on a Marshall to the UK, people are going to be curious about you, and you become an unofficial ambassador for the US. You also become an unofficial ambassador for Marshall, and then when you come back to the States, people are going to be curious about the UK, so you become an unofficial ambassador to the UK. And they want to know that you will be a good representation of all these things, that you have those qualities. Now, this does not mean that you have to have had a role that is ambassadorial-like in order to apply for something like that. What it means is that you have the qualities that make a good ambassador, right? That you have the ability to engage in the community, that you have the ability to engage with people from all different backgrounds. That's what they're looking for. So again, really understanding what is it they want from you is crucial here so that you can describe to the scholarship, I have what you want, here's how. So, just to sum it up on becoming competitive, you gotta reflect on your long-term goals. Now, I know that not all of you may know what you wanna do after undergrad, and that is okay. Or maybe you have a plan, but then life happens, which it does, and things change. So maybe now your destination that you thought that's where everything was gonna go, and that was your dream destination post-graduation, is no longer gonna happen. Or maybe you're still set on going to a certain place or a certain institution, but you have to take an alternative path because something came up, or you lost the funding, or whatever it may be, right? And that's okay. What these applications are asking of you, they're not asking you to sell your soul, and that they're gonna come hunt you down in case you didn't do what you said you would do in your application. What they're asking is that you write your truth as it is right now when you're writing the application. So right now your truth is, I want to pursue a PhD in neuroscience because I want to work on the cure for Alzheimer's, and this is why I need to study at Cambridge because they have the best program for this. I don't know that they do, just an example, but what I'm saying is they just expect you to write your truth as is right, okay? And so they want you to pursue what really interests you. It's really hard to write a competitive scholarship for something that's not of interest. So if you're just applying to Rhodes because Oxford sounds cool, but maybe they don't have a very good program in whatever you're interested in, that's going to be a really hard application to write, and it's not going to be very convincing, right? But if you can write about an institution that you're passionate about and maybe has your dream program, the whole wide world, right? It's very different because then you can tell me about the faculty that you're thinking about working with. Or maybe you can tell me about this state-of-the-art lab that they have that nowhere else has it. Or maybe they're doing something so innovative that only they are doing it right now. And it could be life-changing if you could get into that lab, right? So this is what interests you, is what they want to see. Don't you can't write to the application thinking, well, this is what they want to hear. Like, they'll tell you on the website what they expect from you, right? Like, certain information they expect you to include, but that doesn't mean your interests have to be modified because you think the scholarship wants a specific thing. Being genuine and authentic to yourself is going to be really important. And also taking advantage of the resources on campus. So my office is one of them, but also there might be other opportunities, right? Like in your research lab, maybe your PI knows someone who's doing great things in a lab in Germany and they have funding for international students. It sometimes really is that easy, and one of the most underutilized resources on this campus are faculty, right? Like, I know some of you maybe don't spend a lot of time talking to your faculty, but I would suggest that you do, especially if they're doing stuff that you're interested in. Because one, they've already been through it, so they can tell you what you need to watch out for, what you need to be careful of, or what they learned in that journey. But also, they're connected with faculty at other institutions, they're connected with faculty abroad, and they can help connect you. They are also your future recommendation letter writers. So it's important to establish those connections as early on as you can. Maintain a strong academic profile. That kind of goes without saying, you know, at least 3.5. If you can have it higher, even better. And then strongly consider language study and travel. As I mentioned, there are opportunities for that will help with funding. I think especially for STEM students, like, since you know, STEM students don't typically have those opportunities, if you can find those opportunities and take them, you should, because it's just going to make you a much more well-rounded individual, and it's also going to help you, be more competitive with other STEM colleagues, future colleagues, or other STEM students who may not have the same experiences. And also, you can take any leadership roles on campus or in the community. That's going to look great on any application, on your resume, but also you're going to get to learn a lot about yourself, right? The kind of leader you are or the kind of leader you want to be. And that is going to serve you well way beyond undergraduate. So for really quickly, for letters of rec, again, plan ahead. And also let your recommenders know 2 weeks is the minimum that you should be giving them, but honestly, if you can give them a month or two, even better. First, it's important to inquire if they're able to or willing to write you a letter, right? Sometimes faculty, they don't like to write letters, or they can't because they're too busy. And I know it's hard to hear that, but it's not because they're trying to be malicious, it's just they're being realistic of what their timeline looks like, okay? So it's good to inquire with enough time that if they can't write you a letter, you have a plan B or a plan C, and you have enough time to ask them. And then make sure you follow up, and as Shelley mentioned, like, also please thank your recommenders, right? Most faculty are writing a lot of recommendation letters. You might need more recommendation letters in the future. So, you know, being grateful, saying thank you, even a nice random card, it's going to take you a couple minutes of your life, but it could really make a difference on whether that faculty member is willing to write you another letter down the line. Thank you, and here is our contact information for our office. So if any of you would like to reach out, learn more, or just have an advising session of like what could be a good fit, please do. I would love to talk to any of you.